Hello everyone. In this video I want to just walk you through how to create a simple IDEA script with the dialogues and basically the things that I add on to make the script a bit more interactive and look a bit more professional. So generally when I start off creating a script, I'll always start off by doing the analysis or whatever I want to have done in IDEA. I don't usually write the code directly from the IDEAScript Editor. I'll usually start with something. So here I've got the sample detailed file. Everybody's probably seen this at one point in time because it's installed on different versions of an IDEA. So suppose I just want to do something simple. Suppose I want to take all items that are greater than 1,000 from the sales plus tax. So that's easy enough to do. We just do a direct extraction. I just enter in the equation editor. I'll call this sales plus tax is greater than, I'll say 1,000. I'll just call this high value. And I click on OK. So there we got our analysis. Now if I go into the history, we can go under record extraction and we can see that the history has actually created the IDEA script for us to redo this analysis. And if I can I'll just do a copy. I can copy this IDEA script for the selected task. So this brings me up into the IDEAScript Editor. And as I can see here, the items in red are sometimes, when you're creating a script, the items in red are sometimes the items that you may want to change for variables. So in this instance, suppose I want to take this and basically I want to do a high value extraction on any file that has a numeric field. So the things I got to change in this actual script is I got to have an option to select the file. Then I also have an option to select the field and then give the amount. So I'm going to walk you through how to do this. And I'm going to be doing this through a dialog. So we can do this through inputs. We can do this simply, there's different options here where we can do it just through simple inputs and everything like that. But I usually like to use dialogs because you can use drop-down features and everything. So it looks a bit more professional. So first off, I'm going to just create the dialog. And how you end up going to create the dialog is easy enough. Just click on the dialogs and say new dialog. Or you can go into, I can remember where it is, insert new dialog. So here we got a little canvas here where we can go create a new dialog. So first off, I'm going to click on the new dialog. Over here we've got the properties. So the properties gives me different things I can change within the dialog. So this is the dialog properties here. So if I want to give it a title, so I want to say maybe I would just want to call it high value extraction. See, this title here changes the title that will be appeared on the dialog. And also I'm going to change the function name to something called display it. Display it, it could be any name. IDEA, for whatever reason, uses display it to seem to go along with their help. And I'm going to talk more about this in a few minutes. First off, I'm going to just set up my dialog, look and feel, and then we're going to go back in and actually go in and populate how this would work. So first thing I want to do is I'm going to add in just some static text. I'm going to say, file name. Then I'm going to add in some more static text here. And this is where we're going to show the file name. And the reason I'm using static text instead of like an edit box is because I'm going to actually do something. I'm going to create a button. And I'm going to give it 3 periods. And I'm going to make it a bit smaller. I think I usually put 20, 10. Or actually it's usually 15. I'll put this next to this. So this sort of looks a bit like the IDEA dialogs where you've got the 3 periods indicating that it's a browse button. So what I'm going to have this do is that instead of the person actually entering the name, they're going to click on this browse button. Another window is going to open up with a list of all the IDEA files, and then they're going to go select from there. And I'm just going to make this look a bit better, I'm going to use a group box. So a group box allows you to group stuff, but it also allows you to basically make things, a bit more appearance. Because this text box, I'm not actually going to add any text in here right now unless there's a file name. So having the group box around it, makes it a little bit more professional. Next thing I want to do is I want to add a static text box. I'm going to say select field, select numeric field. I'm going to select the numeric field, and then I'm going to do a drop-down combo box. And what we're going to do here is whenever the person selects the file, it's going to go into that file and get all the numeric fields. So then the person can go in and select the numeric fields. And finally, I'm just going to add the last thing here. And then say enter amount. And I'm going to enter an edit box so that the users can now enter in an amount. And then I'm just going to click on the OK button and the cancel button. So that's our little dialog. So let's just go and see what it looks like. And just first of all, before I run anything, I always like to save it. Let's call this high value demo. So I'm going to leave this as is because I'm going to rechange this. But right now I don't want to call it yet because I'm first setting up the dialog to get the variables that I want to go change. So the next thing I want to do is usually I always enter in the option explicit. Option explicit forces me to define the different variables, be it the objects, the strings, whatever it may be. I like to do it because I do a lot of typos, unfortunately. And by using the option explicit, if I do a typo and I haven't defined that variable, it's going to give me an error. So I'm going to be seeing it. If I didn't have the option explicit and I did make a typo, well, then I'd have to go searching through the code to see what's wrong because it's not going to work properly, even though it's not going to give me an error. And I'm just going to create a few variables. I'm just going to call, a string. So I'm setting up a string variable to hold the file name. And I'm going to do another one as string, and another one is do amount as string. Now you notice that I'm saying amount is string, and the reason I'm doing that is whenever the edit box always returns a string. It doesn't necessarily return. You can put in a numeric in here, but the numeric is actually a string. So I set up it as a string, because if I didn't set up a string and I set it up as like an integer or double and somebody entered into A, B, C, D, what would happen is the code would throw an error. So now I'm just going to say something called main menu. So I'm going to create a function to call a menu. And I always end function. Whenever I set anything up, I always start function. I always put the end right away, so I don't forget it. So I'm going to create a variable here to hold the dialog. So I didn't bother renaming it. I could rename it to something more interesting, but in this instance, oops, I got a typo here. Change that. And you probably should. In this instance, I only got one dialog, so sometimes I'm lazy and I won't do it. If I had multiple dialogs, which you can quite easily in IDEAScript, you should name them all differently. So I'm just creating a variable to hold that dialog. Now, the next thing you want to do is also want to create an integer. So the integer holds whatever I click. So whenever I click on a button like OK, cancel, the push button, what happens is that the IDEAScript will return an integer, and I can test which button is clicked. So I can go in and test what the cancel button is, if it was the OK button, was this button, if it was the push button, done. So, but I need that to make the work. In actual fact, you'll see that the button, well, yeah, I will use the button. I'll show you how to bit, but how I'm going to set this up is I'm not going to really use that integer. I'm going to be doing something a bit more interesting, so I'll show you that in a second. And finally, to make the dialog appear, I'll just do a sec. I'll say button is equal to dialog DLG. So I'll just save that. Then I'm going to go run it. Oops, here I set up the option explicit, but I didn't actually define my variables here. So I'm going to do define my database, and then define my task, and I'm going to find the DB name as string. There we go. So that should get rid of that area. I'll save it again. And here is my dialog. So we see we got the file name. Right now it's got text. That's going to change. We got select numeric field. There's nothing here. So basically it's a blank canvas. I haven't actually done anything with it or any code behind it yet. So that'll be my next step. So I can hit any button now, or I actually hit cancel, and it will take me out of there. So let me go back into the script. So next thing I want to do is I want to be able to play with these variables to make it more interactive. One way that I used to do when I was learning IDEA is I'd do it for button. I'd basically close this, open it up again, close. So basically it would be flipping back and forth as I make changes. Over the years I've found better ways of doing it, and I'm going to show you how the better ways of doing it is. So if you may remember, whenever I created the dialog, I called it a function display it. I gave it a function name. Now if we go into Tools, Language Browser, and this is great because I don't always remember all the code. I can remember what I want to do, but I don't always remember the exact syntax. So language browsers are great to have open at all the times. So they have something under Basic Script Dialog. And in here they got different options for dialog list box, dialog text, dialog value. So I'm just going to grab one of these. And I'm going to go find the code, and here, you've got a function display it. And I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to just go paste it in here, and I'll give it an end function. And what happens is every time you go into the new dialog, you click on anything, you select anything, you make any changes, it runs this function, display it. And this function takes three different actions. It takes the control ID. So the control ID, you notice here, it's got a $sign next to it, so it means it's a string. So the control ID gives you the name of the item that you're doing with. So if I select the numeric field, this drop down here, I could go look for drop list box 1. If I want to click on this button, I'll look for push button 1, and that's what we're going to do. Same thing, OK button 1, cancel button 1. So these are all values that we return to the control ID. The action percentage, and the percentage means it's an integer, depends on what step you are in to display it. So if you're running it for the first time, the action is actually equal to 1. If it's already been open and you've been clicking on it, the action is equal to 2. And there's a couple of other scenarios where the action is equal to 3 and 4. And finally, the sup value, we're not going to be using it in this case, but the sup value can be useful. So suppose I have items here in this drop down. If I click on the item number 2, the sup value would be equal to item number 2. So I can go in and see what exactly item I've selected from the drop down. So it makes it really interactive because then you can go make changes to the dialog based on something you selected on the field. So let's first set this up. And actually I want to add one more variable I usually do. I usually add a Boolean here. Script as Boolean. What this does is if I hit the cancel button or the exit out here, I'll set it to false. Otherwise, I set it to true. Otherwise, I set it to false, so that if I hit cancel, I don't automatically run the script. And how I'd end up doing this is I'd go, if not be exit script, then I run my function else and if, and I can do this little message box, script canceled by user or something like that. So if this is not false, so basically if I've selected it to be true, so I want to exit the script, then I go script cancel by user. If not, then I run this. And you'll see how I set this up in here. Also, I'll add in another variable. I want to add in a variable to display it. I want to call something called dim the exit function as Boolean. Now the reason I add this is that I only want the dialog to close if I hit the cancel button or some other way. So by having this function here, I can basically say, okay, I only want to close during these parameters. If I didn't set this up, and we'll see the rest of the code in a second, if I didn't set this up, every time I clicked on a button or something like this, the dialog would close, and I don't like that. You know, it's not professional, so I'd have to reload the dialog and everything like that. So I'm just setting up a variable to decide whether or not I want to close this. Now I'm going to do a select case on the action field and select, and I want case 1 and case 2. So I'm going to do something if when the dialog starts up, that'll be case 1, and if case 2, that means that I'm within the dialog, then I'll do something else, and usually I'll do another select case, and this time I'm going to be looking for the control ID. Oops. Don't need that in quotes because it's a variable. So now I can say, I'm going to do my end select. Now the different options I want to hear is I want to do case push button 1. So that is, I'll do something if I click on this push button. Next thing I want to do is whoops, case OK button 1. So if I hit the OK button, I want to do something, and then I want to do case cancel button 1. So in case I can cancel. And easy enough, what we'll do is if we do a cancel case, we might as well do this right now. I'm going to do select set v exit script to true. Oops, not 2. Sorry. And v exit function equals true. So let's just save this. I'm going to run it to make sure I've got no typos, syntax errors, so everything's good. And now you see, I hit cancel, script canceled by user. So we got that working. Let's see, first thing I want to do, another thing I like to do also is if the user already has a file open, I don't see why they need to go select it. So what I usually do is I actually do something called I'll add some code in the main menu to see if there's actually a file open. And you can do that by, I'll set the file name is equal to, and I'm just going to the file browser because, like I said before, I don't always have a good memory for the syntax, so I always use the file browser. So I know it's under client, and I know, where is it? Current database. So here we got the code to get the current database name. So I'm just going to grab that code, and I'm going to say, okay, file name is equal to that. Now let's go see, and I'm just going to put a message box right now to see if this works. So now I'll just save it. So now I have a file that's open, so I'll run that. And it gives me the file name. Perfect, just what I want. And then I hit cancel. Now see what happens. I'm going to close this file. We always have to make sure, you know, all the different scenarios. So what happens if I try to run this and the file is actually closed? So I'll just run this again. Oh, it gives me an error. See, I don't want that error, you know, because you don't want it to stop. So how I get around that is there's something called OnAir Resume next. So what this does is if it gives me an error, it just keeps on going. It doesn't actually stop the script. So if we try running this again, now it is giving me a file name, but it's giving me blank, which is fine because there's no file open, but it's not giving me an error. So there, I got around that problem. So next, let's write the code to actually go grab that file. And we can do that in two ways. Well, actually, yes, we'll grab the file first. No, actually, no, sorry. I want it to happen, I want to do it when the dialog opens up. I want to show what the file is. And actually, sorry guys, I'm just jumping around here, thinking out loud. What I'm actually going to do first is I'm going to write some code to populate this text box with the file name. And how I can do that is I can just do an if s file name is equal to, so if it's blank, then else and if. And there's a code here. We'll go back into the language browser. Let's go back up here into Dialog, and there's a code here called Dialog text, and this sets or changes the text of a dialog control. So here I can just go I'll grab this example here, and what I'll do is, okay, so if it's blank, and we can go here, the name, first of all it's the name, so we want to go as text2, so I'll enter in the name text2 here. And then I'll enter in what I want to show up here. So we'll just do please select file. I'll save it. Let's just go run this again. I always run it as I go through steps. I got a blank here. Now we say please select the file. Exactly what I want. Hit cancel. Now if we want to do it with the file, we'll do the same thing. Except now we'll just put the file name in there, the variable. So actually we can get rid of this message box now because we don't need it. Save it. So now let's actually try this with the file open. So we got the file. So here we go. Let's try running this again. See, it's showing me the file, but it's showing me all the the file structure, the path and all that kind of stuff. Maybe I don't want the path. Maybe I only want the actual file name. And I used to have this large code to do this. What I actually found is in criteria, we'll go into criteria. I'll show you a little trick. Character fields. Within criteria, within the equation editor, we have all these nice equations that IDEA's given us that do different things. Great stuff. You may or may not realize that most of these are actually accessible for the IDEAScript by changing the at to an I. Now I say most because for whatever reason IDEA stopped doing this as of version 9. So I believe anything after any functions that have been added after version 9 you can actually access for the equation editor. For IDEAScript. Why they did this I have no idea. I wish they'd kept on going, but I've never actually got an answer why they did this, and I have done that, talked to them a few times. So I used to have this nice little block of code to actually get the thing out, but then I realized I could just use the strip. And the strip allows me to strip, no, sorry, not the strip, geez, okay, it's too early in the morning. What I wanted is the split. So the split allows me to split out information. So I have the string, I have the start separator, so the start separator in here would be the slash. But actually, we're going to do this differently. We're going to do this backwards. So the order is because we want to get the end of it. So what we want is the start separator, since we're going backwards, would be just a blank. The end separator would be the slash. The segment would be the first segment because we're going backwards, and the order would be 1 from right to left. So I'm just going to go grab an example here, and I'm just going to go paste it in the code. So I'll just close this. Let's go back into the equation editor. So I'm going to just say, I'm just going to do this. So what we need to do this, instead of the at split, it is now the I split. So I'm going to change this to the S file name. So we want, we'll get rid of this, sorry, we'll just get rid of this variable here. So we want the blank because we're starting backwards. So we want the first segment, and we're doing it from right to left. Let's just go see if this works. I have to go test it. Oops, I got the slash the wrong way. Alright. This is why I keep testing it, because I have a tendency to make boo-boos along the way, so I gotta just make sure everything's running right. There we go. Now I only have the file name. Hey, not too bad. Only one line of code gives me that file name. Nice little thing to know. So, if you're creating IDEAScripts and you've got certain functionality, because unfortunately Visual Basic doesn't have as much, or the Visual Basic we have access to with an IDEAScript doesn't have everything, having the functions that are available in the equation editor are great. Okay, so we've got that done. So the next thing we want to do, so now we've actually got to the point where we've finished selecting the file name. That's good. So now we want to do the drop-down field. So what I'm going to do is when I open the dialog for the first time, the action variable will be equal to 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test if s file name is equal to, so is it blank? Or actually, is it not blank? Because if it's not blank, then I want to populate this drop-down field. And how I do that is, first check, I have to make sure there's a file name. So if there's a file name, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call another function to get all the fields that are in there. They're in the within that file. And what I'll do here is within the numeric field, we'll go back here. There's also an option here for attached list. And what I'll do is I'm going to create a variable, and this is the variable that IDEA seems to use. So we'll just use it, listbox1. So now I've created a variable that is attached to this item here. And I'm just going to go back. So I'm going to use that. So what I'll go do now is I'm going to create a new function. And I'll just call it getFields. I'll say get numeric fields, get num fields. And again, I'll have to write the function here. Here I'm going to write it from scratch. And here this is where, again, I'll go into the language browser. I'll go down to field, Yahoo field, and find out field name. So here I got the code for the field name, so I need the database, the table, and the field. Fair enough. So I'm going to go dim db as database, dim task, sorry, it was table. Table as table def, dim field as field, and then I'm going to set up my, open the database. So I'll go set db equals the client, and I can just copy this over too. But now I'm going to use my variable that holds the file name. I'm going to use this, and I have gotten into the habit of when I open an object, I close it right away. Same thing is, and I've also gotten the habit of indenting. You don't really have to indent, but I don't know, I've gotten a habit, it just ends up being easier to read, I find, and it's sort of become my style of coding in here. So let's go back to the language browser. So we can just go set table def, and I'm going to set table equals nothing. And I'm going to set also a variable, dim I as integer, because I want to read through each of the files, or each of the fields. So I'll need a loop to do that, and I'll use I. And I'm using integer because integer can hold up to a little over 32,000, up to 32,000. So I've yet to come across the file that has 32,000 fields. I think the limit in IDEA is 1,000 fields, so I'm good with an integer. So what I'm now going to do is create a loop for I equals 1 to table.count next I. And if we go back in, again, language browser, and we go back up into the table, like if you're not using the language browser, you should be, because it's got a wealth of information in here. So go table def, we got count, gets the number of fields in the table definition. That's exactly what I want. So now I'm going to loop for each one. Again, I'm going to go back. Let's go see the field name. So we got the code here. So we'll set the field is equal to, we'll just use the set field. But there's also getField, but there's also a function called getFieldAt. And in here, I'll put I, so I'll get field at first field, second field, third field, fourth field, and so on. And I'm going to put the set field equals nothing after the I. So I'm just, because I'm clearly using this object, I'm not going to set it to nothing until it's actually finished doing. Now, I've created the list box one, which is an array. So I'm going to be populating this array in this dropdown. And first off, I got to redim this array. I'm going to redim list box one as 0. So I'm going to redim it to 0 amount. So I'm just redimming it for one item. And also, I'm going to create another variable, Boolean first time. Now, if I had been wanting to get all the fields, I could have just redimmed the list box to the total number of fields, the field count. But in this instance, I'm actually just looking for numeric fields. So I don't want blanks in my array. So how I get around doing this is I'm going to go through each one and I'm going to increase this array each time it goes through. Now, again, we're going with the language browser, and there is a function called isNumeric. So I'm going to go do another if. So if field, so if the field is numeric, then and if. And if this is the first time through, so I'm going to do b first time equals true. So if this is the first time through, I've already done the array. So I'll just say if b first time, then I don't have to actually put the equals to true because it already looks at it. So if it's true, it'll work. If it's false, it won't. I'll do the end if. So then I want to make sure that I do set it to false. So this only works the first time. And what I'll do is I'm going to take my array, list box 1, 0 equals to field name. And there we go. So that will get my first one. Now for all the other ones, so remember I'm doing this so that I don't have any blanks in my array. So how I end up doing this is basically I'll increment each time my array, and the code for this is go redim, preserve. I'll do list box 1, and then what I'll do is I'll take the number of items in the list box 1. So in this item in time there'll be only 1 or 0 items, and I'll increment it by 1. So I've added 1 additional blank at the end of the array. And then I'll add the field name to the end of it, and how I'll do this is I'll just do list box 1, and I'll just do ubound, so this will give me the last item, and again I'll just list box 1, oops, I need 2, alright, equals to field.name. And there we go. Now hopefully I wrote this correctly. We'll go in and run it again. We might have done some syntax errors because I'm just doing this off the top of my head. And so what I'll do now is I'll add this. First of all, I'm going to call this function. So this is kind of neat. When you actually call this, you will see if the database is not open or whatever, you'll see it doing a summary or doing some stuff in the background while the dialog's open. So that's kind of neat. And next, I want to attach this information to my dialog. and there's actually a function for that. Again, let's go back to the language browser. And we've got here dialog list box array. And here we go. Here's the code for it. I'll just copy it over. Let's go back here. I'll go change this. So the name of this is, we want drop list box 1. And our information is in list box 1. I'm going to save this. Let's go see if it runs. Okay, and it ran, and it's only giving me the numeric field. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numeric fields. And let's just go into here, and we can see we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So perfect. So it did exactly what I wanted. Hey, I'm happy. Okay, so now we've got the drop list box. So now we're going to take this, and we're going to do it in case that there is no actual field. So I'm just going to close this. And what I'm going to do is, if there's the push button 1, what we're going to do is we'll create another function, and we'll call it just getFile. Now, what I want to do here is, again, I'll just go back to the language browser, and there's, oops, not a dialog, but there's common dialogues, and there's one that has the file explorer. So what we want here is, we'll just grab this code here, really simple code. So I'm just going to get rid of this. So we're just defining an object, and we're setting it to the common dialogues, and then we're going to be setting our file name, and change it to something different. Object Explorer, and I'm just going to indent this, and I'm just going to go set object equals nothing, and then we're going to just go return the file. Well, actually, we don't have to return the file name because I made this the file name as a global. If I hadn't made it as a global, then I'd have to return it. So now what I'll do is, so if the user hits the push button, what we're going to do is we're going to call the get file, and then we're going to do the same code as this, exact same thing. So I'm just going to call it over. I'll just indent it. So then we check, okay, did the user actually select the file? Because they might have hit cancel, they might not have selected a file, and if they had, then we go and get the number fields and populate the drop-down list. So I'm just going to save that. No file open, perfect. So let's go run it. So we go select the file. Here we got the browser, so now we're going to open it. It disappeared. I didn't want that. And the reason it disappeared is I got to add in some additional code to make sure that this stays open unless I want to unless I actually want it to close. And how I do that is I make to display it, so the name of the function, so I'll go if the exit function, then I think it's display it equals 0, else equals 1, and if. So if I've actually set the exit function, then I display it as equal to 0 or 1, and I may have these backwards, so we're going to have to go test this out. So let's go just try that. See, also I can go in and make changes, and you notice it did not close this time. So I can go back and forth, and this is the same files, but I've got multiple files. Every time I change the file name, this drop down would change. So therefore, we're doing really good, and you notice that actually worked. So if I want to exit the function, display it has to equal 0. If it doesn't equal 0, if it equals 1, then that means to keep it open. So I've got all the information here. So now I'm going to do the OK button. And in the OK button, I'm going to go in and make sure that I've got all my variables. And the first thing I want to do is I want to check is to see, if it's selected, if it's still blank, then I want to do a message box. Please select the file. So I want to make sure, that the person selected a file. So let's go close all this. So there, all the files are closed. I go in and try running this. If I hit OK, I get please select the file. Perfect. Now, I don't have to actually check to see if there's a person has selected the drop list, because if you may notice, if we run this, again, I'll go select the file. Automatically, it's set to the unit price, the first one. So I don't actually have to go in and check to make sure that a numeric field has been selected. But what I do have to do is go in and get that information, and I want to change that to the variable. So I set up a variable called field name. So I'm going to do that's field name, and how I go grab the information from this, hopefully I can remember, is I'll go in and I'll do list box 1, and within the list box 1 I want the item number for the drop list box 1, and how I access this is I'll do new dialog dot drop list box 1. So this grabs the information from the dialog, and it's pointing to the item that is selected in the list. And let's just do a little message box here and make sure that it's working properly, because sometimes I get this screwed up. Easy enough. So let's go say quantity. Quantity, yes. How about sales tax? Sales tax, yes. So perfect. So I'm getting the information that I want. So there. So I don't need that message box anymore since I'm already grabbing the information. So the final thing I want to get is the amount. So again, I'll just go grab that. Same thing here is I want to go s amount. Whoops. And in this instance, we want to call it new dialog. The capitals or whatever doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of anal about this. And this is text box 1. Oops. Don't want to leave any spaces there. And let's just do a message box to make sure that we're getting what we want. And I'll just save that. Let's go try that. We'll go 123.4534. Perfect. Now, what I want to do here is, we're getting the amount, but what I want to make sure it is an amount, because if I go run this, I can basically put whatever I want in here. And trust me, I don't want to do that, because if we do that, the script, when it's actually run, is going to fail on us. So we want to do some error checking. And what I end up doing first is, so first I got to say the file name, message box select. Then I'm going to do an else, if, and then I'm going to go see if, first of all, if the S amount is not numeric. And there's something called is numeric. So I'm checking to see, is it not numeric? So is it something else? And it's called the S amount. And then I'll give it another message box saying proper amount. So let's just go try running that again. We'll do this, 1, 2, 3. It says please enter a proper amount. Perfect. And also maybe I also wanted to make sure else if s amount not equal to blank. So we want to make sure it's not blank too. And we can just, we'll just say the same thing. And you know what? I'm doing another else if here, but we could have probably just done an or. Easy enough. Save some coding, but oh well. So if I just leave it blank, no, it's not giving me anything. So what did I do wrong? I want to do equals, not equals. That's why you always have to test each time. These are proper. Perfect. So that's working. There's also another way to test if it's just an integer, but in this case I don't really care if it's a decimal or not. So right now we've got the file name, we've got the field name, and we've got the amount. So we got all the information we need to go in and change our script. So now I'm going to go back to my direct extraction. So here, when I'm doing the direct extraction, I'm going to change the 1000 and I'm going to add on the amount. And then here, I'm going to go in and I never remember what the variables are. Field name. Scroll down. There we go. We've now changed the equation, so it'll use the field that I've selected and the amount that I've selected. Next thing I want to do is I want to just go in and I'll just change this to my file name. So now it's using the file that I've selected. DBase name. I always have a tendency to do do the client dot unique file name function here. That way I always know that the file is unique and I'm not going to be overwriting anything that's already done. And maybe I want to call it, I'll just say high value for field, leave a space, then use the ampersand. Use the ampersand when you're joining character fields or text fields together. I'll say the field name. And I'll say amounts over, again. There we go. So we'll get a unique file name. And you notice in this instance, I'm not putting the IMD file because when you do the client unique file name, it actually will add on the IMD and add on the entire path. So the DB name becomes the entire path and file name. So once that's all complete, I can now call my extraction. So let's actually go see if this works. So we're opening the dialog, which is good. So save sample details. So here we'll go unit price. Now let's try quantity. We didn't do quantity before. And say we got quantities over 500. So now I'm going to click on OK. Whoops. I forgot something here. What I forgot to do is I said the OK button, but I never said if everything's working fine, that the exit function equals true. So now I'm saying, okay, I got a file name, the amount's in the proper format, I can exit the function. And then now we go be exit function that says true. So if it's true, display it will equal to 0, and then the dialog will collapse and the code will continue on. So let's just try that again. Again, we want to do quantity over 100. I click on OK. Does the extraction. Now high value for quantity amounts. Now there's one other thing I just forgot, but let's go in the history. And now we can see, high value for field quantity amounts over 100, quantity over 100. So there, it's working. So the only thing we got left here is we forgot to do a refresh list. And that's usually the last code that I'll have. So in the main, there's a function called client.refresh file, you can't type, Explorer. Now let's just try this one last time. I want to go back, sample details, do sales tax, say over 500. I'll click on OK. And there we go. Now if we go into history, we're seeing this. So there we go. So here's it's a fairly simple example of going through, creating an easy script with a dialog, tagging a field, and so on. So you can see, there are a lot of steps to this. The thing is, when I'm doing this from scratch. Like this code's from scratch, but I got templates for this, so I just copy and paste because it's all the same thing. Same thing for the get file, that's used over and over again. The get number fields, that code's always used over and over again. So I'm writing this from scratch now, but generally I would stop off with some kind of template so I wouldn't have to rewrite the script. So anyways, hopefully that this will help you out, get you started in doing simple idea scripts. And I guess that's about it. So until next time, thanks.